Hi, Thriller Movies Recap here. Today I'm going to show you a movie titled Dr. Sleep, so relax and enjoy. Spoilers ahead, watch out. Violet Hanson, a young child, is out camping with her family. She ventures into the woods one afternoon and discovers a woman sitting by herself by the lake. Rebecca Ferguson, who is known as Rose the Hat, presents herself to Violet and enchants her with magic. The girl then discovers others seeing them from a nearby hiding place. Prior to Rose and everyone else in the woods converging on Violet, Rose informs Violet that she possesses a small amount of magic. Danny Torrance is still recovering from the tension of his experience at the Overlook Hotel elsewhere. He hasn't spoken to his mother Wendy since they left the hotel, which worries her, but he continues to have nightmares about the ghosts of the place, including the Grady twins and the bathtub lady from room 237. Danny has shine abilities that allow him to see ghosts like Dick Halloran. By demonstrating a box that he can use to capture evil spirits, he demonstrates to Danny a method for keeping them at bay. Wendy then rushes outside to see Danny sitting alone on the bench. Danny and Wendy are watching TV together that evening. The bathtub lady is waiting for Danny in the bathroom when he excuses himself. He successfully traps her inside a box he creates in his head. He goes back to his mother and resumes their conversation. Jump to 2011, where Dan is an alcoholic and resides in New Jersey. He engages in a bloody bar brawl in which he knocks down a man, and he later hooks up with a patron from the same establishment. He is annoyed by finding the woman's child when he awakens in the morning. A young woman named Andy meets with an older man in Long Island after he discovered her online. She is being observed by Rose and Crow Daddy, her right-hand man. Andy can get people to do what she commands before inflicting a snake-bite-like cut on their cheek. Rose and Crow capture Andy outside the theater and take her with them after being impressed. They take her to their lair, where Rose informs Andy that she possesses unique abilities that benefit their cult, the True Knot. She is given the moniker Snakebite Andy by Rose, who also makes the promise that they would eat well, stay young, and live long. It's Abra Stone's 5th birthday today. Her parents Dave and Lucy find that Abra has managed to make a number of spoons rise to the ceiling in the kitchen. She only needs to utter abracadabra for them to strike the table. To begin a new life, Dan travels to Fraser, New Hampshire. Dan confides to Billy Freeman, a local he meets and befriends, that he is running away from something. Billy provides the landlord with a reference for Dan, enabling him to find housing. Rose takes Andy to the beach that evening for a ceremony. Grandpa Flick, the oldest True Knot member, conducts the ritual. Rose takes out a container carrying Violet's shine, which appears as a potent vapor. While the other True Knot members receive their fair portion, Rose feeds Violet's shine to Andy. Andy yells and writhes till the shine has been absorbed. In a nightmare, Dan sees a ghost curled up next to him. He asks Billy for assistance, and Billy invites Dan along to an AA meeting. Dan is introduced to Dr. John Dalton following the meeting. Dan approaches Dalton after noticing him gripping his wrist and explains that he dropped his watch in a lavatory, which only Dalton would know. Dalton offers Dan a job at the hospice because of his previous experience as an orderly and because he is impressed by Dan's insight. He is also persuaded by Billy's recommendation. One night, when Dan is sweeping the floors, he discovers the hospice's cat, Azzy, entering a senior man's room. The man is aware that every time Azzy enters a person's room and takes a seat on their bed, it is because she is aware that person will pass away. The man initially seems terrified, but Dan reassures him telepathically that passing away is just like sleeping. The man calls Dan Dr. Sleep after feeling at ease. The elder man's breath departing his body signaled his departure moments later. Upon arriving at his house, Dan discovers hello painted on the wall with a smiley face. He replies with just the word hi. Dan has maintained his sobriety 8 years later, in the year 2019. He talks about how he never met his father and only felt a connection to him when he drank at a meeting. He came to understand that although his father had to go through a similar struggle, Dan had taken the decision to prevail. He keeps working as an orderly, attending to patients who are close to passing away. He keeps in touch with Abra as well. The True Knot hasn't eaten a quality meal in a while, relying only on the leftovers from children with weaker shines. They follow Bradley Trevor, a teenage baseball player, who benefits from his shine when playing. He is followed home by the True Knot, and Andy forces him into their van. They take him to a remote location, where they mercilessly kill him by pinning him down and feeding off his screams of agony. As soon as Abra discovers the crime, she starts yelling in her house and telling her parents that the boy has been killed. Abra is there too, and Rose can feel her, calling her looker. Dan now notices the word Redrum scrawled on his wall. When Abra is asked who, she responds, "Baseball boy." Bradley is then interred in a small burial by the True Knot. Abra investigates Bradley's disappearance in some detail. She can overhear her peers' thoughts at school. She sees the True Knot in their places when she enters her chamber at home. She glances out the window and temporarily floats as she is connected to Rose, who is at the grocery store. Rose is able to see Abra and make eye contact with her, but Abra pushes Rose away from her, giving Rose enough of a push to send her flying across the floor. She is both amazed and alarmed by this ability. Rose relays this information to Crow and warns that they must eliminate her since her radiance may be too strong for the True Knot. Eventually, Dan and Abra meet and discuss their gifts, which Dan refers to as the Shining or Tony because he believed it was like having an imaginary friend. Dan was considered an imaginary buddy by Abra. He cautions her from using her shine in any way that would draw their attention when she informs him about the True Knot. Dan meets Dick again for the first time since his early years after work. He follows Azzy into a bedroom. He asks Dan to protect Abra since they have a connection and warns Dan about what the True Knot actually does. Dan is informed by Dick that this is the final time he will see him. Abra is sleeping when Rose enters her thoughts during meditation. When Rose attempts to search through what appear to be filing cabinets, Abra locks her hand in one of the drawers because she knew Rose would return, causing the skin on her hand to rip when Rose pulls it out. As soon as she regains consciousness, she notices that her injuries has followed her. She informs the others that Abra laid a trap for her, making it obvious that she must be put to death. Then, Crow lets Rose know that Grandpa Flick is cycling. He convulses until he decomposes and the cult swallows his steam since he is too weak to continue. Abra contacts Dan once more and requests his assistance in locating Bradley's body since she can discover the cult if she touches his baseball glove. Dan is led by Abra to the location of the boy's grave with Billy's assistance. The finding horrifies and physically repulses Dan and Billy, who dig up the body. They return with the glove to Abra's home, but Dave believes Uncle Dan to be some kind of creep after learning about Abra's interactions with him. Abra is able to monitor the cult and determine their whereabouts after explaining everything to Dave and showing him their abilities. Dan and Billy use Abra, who is emerging from her kitchen, as bait to lure the cult into the woods. Rose feels the misery as the cult members are eliminated one by one as Dan and Billy conceal and start firing at them. Andy uses her final breaths to trick Billy into fatally shooting himself in the head after he shoots her. Crow kills Dave and kidnaps Abra in the meantime. When Dan gets back home, he is able to connect his mind to Abra's and briefly take control of her. Together, they cause Crow to steer into a tree. Because he wasn't buckled in, he is instantaneously murdered when he is catapulted through the windshield. Dan pulls up and finds Abra. Then they go in their car to take their last position at the now decrepit and abandoned Overlook Hotel. Dan moves through the structure where his enduring trauma first surfaced. He discovers room 237, which still bears Jack Sack's marks. Dan goes to the mezzanine where he encounters Lloyd, the bartender, who looks eerily like Jack but insists he is just Lloyd. Dan describes how Wendy passed away when he was 20 and how he could tell she was dying because of the flies he always saw about people who were about to pass away. Before drinking the drink he offered Dan, Lloyd then lets down his veneer and channels Jack. Soon after Rose shows up, Dan and Abra work together to lure her into the icy hedge labyrinth. Abra manages to cut Rose's legs, but Rose is able to overcome them and escape. Dan confronts Rose as Abra flees. She enters his head and witnesses the terror and fear he went through in that hotel, allowing her to begin absorbing his shine. Rose then notices the Overlook Spirits boxes and believes they hold greater power, but Dan instead lets them loose to use them against Rose. Rose is surrounded by the Grady twins, the Bathtub Lady, and other ghosts who consume her shine and permanently ruin her. But they eventually focus on Dan and take control of him. He locates Abra, but she uses her connection to contact Dan and claim that he stopped at the boiler room. Knowing what will happen, Dan sends Abra outside while he brings the spirits to the boiler room and waits outside as the Overlook eventually catches fire. Later, Abra carries on her communication with Dan's ghost. She initially denies anything when her mother questions her about it, but she later confesses that she was speaking to Dan in addition to her father. Lucy seems unaffected by Abra's abilities. Abra excuses herself to visit the restroom before they all watch TV together. Abra is there ahead of the bathtub lady even though she is there waiting for her. Subscribe for more videos like this, turn on notifications and leave a like to help the channel out. Thank you for watching.